Right, so we'll just start letting people in. Should. So just give it a couple a minute or so and let everyone join on.
Yeah.
Well, we can start and let people keep joining as we go.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I'm Jackie Hemwood, the Research Project Manager at Centre for Eye Research Australia. I'd like to thank you all for joining tonight's seminar, which will discuss artificial intelligence in medicine. Oh. Yeah. And the value-based healthcare perspective. So this is the 14th workshop in a series discussing artificial intelligence in healthcare. And these workshops are supported by the Medical Research Future Fund with the goal to connect the diverse skills of clinicians, researchers, healthcare workers, and computer and artificial intelligence scientists. Therefore, we're trying to get everyone working together to develop and build AI solutions for real-world healthcare challenges. So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we connect tonight via our computers and pay our respects to their elders past and present. So tonight we're very lucky to have Associate Professor Tam Nguyen. So Associate Professor Tam Nguyen has over 20 years of experience in working in clinical trials, health and medical research, and the research management sector, including tertiary teaching hospitals, medical research institutes, and universities across Australia. Tam also holds academic appointments with Melbourne Medical School, Monash Medical School, and RMIT University. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Associate Professor Tam Nguyen.
Great. Well, thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Professor Nguyen, for the invitation. Just checking you can see the screen and you can hear me okay. We did a test run before. So AI in medicine, value-based healthcare perspective. So I guess part of this talk is talk a bit about AI, some of the application in medicine and healthcare, and what it means, part of that, I guess, applications of the use of AI. A couple of the disclosure. So I do sit on a couple of boards, also working as a consultant for clinical and management with a number of health tech, medtech, biotech companies, as well as private equity, as well as doing, I suppose, the due diligence and merger and acquisition as well. Also sit on the investment committee for Horizon 3 Biotech, which is a late stage fund. And recently co-edited a book on AI in medicine, which Professor Nguyen and his team not only contributing one, but two book chapters. So I do feel a bit of an imposter here, speaking to some of the experts in the field. So I guess I thought, part of the discussion tonight is looking at some of the challenges in healthcare that we're facing, how AI has been deployed in healthcare, and in a way looking at that latest advancement of what AI can do. And then I'll touch on the value-based healthcare and what it means, and touching on the part looking at implementations and change management, because I think that's important. And that's the work of one of my PhD students, which I'm co-supervising, and looking at patient experience through AI. So quick slide about us and Vincent, in case you're not aware. So we're part of St Vincent Healthcare Network, 36 facilities along the Eastern Seaboard. Obviously, providing care. We're the second largest private healthcare provider in the country, but importantly, very active in clinical research and clinical trials. Just make sure you can see my cursor here. So as a network, we're very active in clinical research and clinical trials, covering drugs, devices, digital diagnostics. Digital, by that I mean AI, machine learning, and we actually collaborate with various research groups, including from CERA with Professor Nguyen, and as well as being active in the AI space as well with various projects, including the breast screen study that is funded, I think the same round as the one that CERA received, and it was with Breast Screen Australia, looking at improve the breast cancer diagnosis and predictions. So let's look at the Australian healthcare landscape. So this is the stats, the latest one from the 2022, the Institute of Health and Wellbeing report on average day in Australian hospital. This is, just move the cursor. This is what it costs, and when you look at it, the healthcare, and a few slides down the track, we'll talk about the actual economics of it and how AI can actually help to, I guess, to reduce some of that cost, but also increase the experience and the equity of access for patient. But what we see is that obviously, and of course, every day when whether you read the news, read the paper or sort of watch the news, there's always invariably aspects of healthcare, whether there's talk about improvement in healthcare or the lack of support and funding and sort of blockage within the system. And I suppose, how we, and I guess from the outset is that throwing more technology investment does not mean it's going to solve the problem. And I'll show you the slide where you look at, for example, places like the US, where healthcare spending as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, which is the measurement of the nation wealth, spending more does not mean it's actually translate to better outcome. And this is a really interesting, I guess, who works in healthcare. Maybe, 5-10 years down the track, we should also include robots and other software that we deploy in healthcare, perhaps. And I think, you look at any states and federally as well, there's always talk of, we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough resource. And for those of you who heard me speak at various forums, you probably hear this all the time, but the fact of the matter is that, every single state department, state government talking about, we're going to put more money, getting more doctors, getting more nurses into the healthcare system. And it's like, well, where are we going to find all the doctors and nurses? And so part of that is looking at ways to actually improve the workflow, the process, because the investment on people is important, but you can't just, of the number of medical schools around the country, you cannot just, produce thousands of doctors and nurses like, instantly. So it takes time, right? So, and this is where, when you look at the actual cost, where and by the way, even though the report is 2022, the actual data is from 2017-18. And when you look at this, remember 40% is from the spending is to hospital, primary health care, and other services there. And this is where you got to look at, well, actually, there's a rural primary healthcare GP network, for example. And I'll go through some example where, tertiary center like us or the INEs, where we could definitely work with primary health network, GP networks, that actually can reduce that bottleneck in our healthcare system. The other really interesting one is that health spending is growing faster than the rest of the economy, which is kind of, a worry, because it's like, and we're the 8th highest in the OECD in terms of the health spending. So we're not quite close at 20%, but I think we passed the double digit in terms of percentage of GDP. So more spending, but it's actually looking at how the funding is being used, I guess, efficiently. So back in 2016, the World Economic Forum was talking about the various technology disruption in healthcare. And when you look at it, things hasn't changed that much, considering, for them to prepare the report, it would have been back in 2015. So 7 years ago. Some of these are actually slowly sort of making through. So continuous monitoring, retail clinics, connected home, right through to virtual care. And mind you, back in 2016 when this came out, people were like, oh, well, telehealth, virtual care, what's the relevance here? And then bang, all of a sudden the COVID pandemic hit us, and all of a sudden everything's sort of becoming so relevant. And I'll go through some example in terms of how AI it's actually sort of weave into this, and bearing in mind that, as I mentioned, look at the efficiency, but also the I guess the user experience, both from the patient perspective, the physicians, as well as that equity of access as well, because introducing new technology does not mean you will straight away improve the equity of access, and I'll go through that in a bit more details as well. And this is drew down in terms of a bit further in terms of some of the recommendations. As I said, this is back in 2016. It's still really relevant. So, so just to set the scene, I know that people on the call will be very more than sort of familiar with this, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. So in this diagram here, you look at, I guess, AI and then machine learning, deep learning as a subset of AI, which is really a subset of computer science. That is, when you look at the Venn diagram, linking into data science, mathematics with statistics, data analytics and mining. And weaving into that is all of the, I guess, different aspects of, in terms of potential applications as well. When it comes to big data, AI and big data, in healthcare, certainly we tend to think typically, in terms of research studies, data, from government agency, whether it's from the Bureau of Statistics or the Institute of Health and Wellbeing. They do have a lot of actually data set. And actually, I was looking at biobank. I was doing some teaching recently, talking about biobank, for example. That's another source of data set that could sort of bring into, I guess, the mix of big data in healthcare. And then part of that is, in terms of supervised learning, unsupervised, and reinforced learning. The other aspect we don't tend to think about, I guess, perhaps is social media, where, patients becoming more, I guess, attuned to searching for, and in a way, it's actually looking at potentially improving health literacy for patient. But the caveat of that is it's you can look at the reliable source of information before you can actually really sort of make any sense of that. And so genetic, lifestyle, microbiomes, and all of the omics data feeding in, as well as all the wearables. We all, well, not quite wearable, we all have one of these, which is, some of us have wearables on our wrist, but it's constantly collecting data. So another way of looking at what it means, the input, the big data management, and then the AI technology, as well as the use case here. And if you think of it as, I guess, a couple of key pillars. So the assessments of disease, diagnosis, and so on and so forth, managing complication, patient care assistant, definitely in the medical research space. So these are the pillars here, and I refer back to the recent book, which, as I said, Professor Nguyen and his team. It's a chapter on ophthalmology. We had various other chapters from various research group, including the Australian Institute of Machine Learning from Adelaide, from CSIRO, from St Vincent's, from other groups as well. So I think it's growing as a few, but also I think, and this is just a slide to show you in terms of, I guess, the global revenue for AI platform across healthcare. And it's predicted, and mind you, this is back in 2020, that by 2024, it's going to be over $4 billion. And we're already seeing it's actually gone past that. Some of this data here, AI in medicine market, it's actually higher predictions by 2028. It's going to be about $58 billion. And in a way, when you look at some of the use case, and I'll skip through some of this is North American, Europe, the European market. And so it makes sense when you look at some of the use case, because in a way, sometimes when you look at it, it might be, even in my view, even could potentially be underestimating. So value-based healthcare is not new. And I remember when I took my classes for my MBA, and Michael Porter, he's a professor of marketing, actually. But he got involved in healthcare and talking about how redefining healthcare and sort of creating that value. So essentially, he's an economist, researcher / professor of marketing from the Harvard Business School. He brought economic theories and then strategy concepts to bring that into, sort of as a strategic kind of perspective. And value-based healthcare is a way of organizing healthcare that maximize outcomes. So as we were talking before, spending more money doesn't mean that you bring about, better health outcome, right? It could be sort of really efficient, and, you've got to do proper, evaluations to make sure that what you are looking at is actually makes sense or actually derive the actual value. And so in that value-based healthcare systems, you've got patients that have their needs actually addressed in sort of really integrated way. So it could be AI could bring that into looking at connecting systems. Clinicians have data they need to continuously improve care. Now, that's the big one, because often clinicians, and the other thing too, not all hospitals actually on electronic medical records or data has actually been bring together in a sort of coordinated way. So it's hard for clinicians to actually provide care that is considered as, because reducing silos is one thing, but you've got to be able to have data available. And then organizations that have actually incentive align the value for patients as well. Because, and this is not talking about public versus private and so on and so forth. But I think certainly when you're looking at the concept of having that sort of understanding of the share health needs of a patient, solutions that improve health outcomes in a sort of integrated manners that actually you're able to measure the outcomes and costs. All right, let me move on to so value for patients. So these are the key principles: value for patient, not just lowering costs, unrestricted competition based on results, and it's actually creating this competition on medical condition over the full cycle of care, rather than you go to different specialty. High quality care should be less costly. That is always contentious, isn't it? It's always challenging to do that. Value driven by provider experience, scale, and learning at the medical condition level. And this is another interesting one. Definitely we see that competition at a regional, national, not just local, and I would argue that it's actually international as well. And absolutely the level of innovation. So let's do challenges though, because in any sort of technology deployment, there's that lack of resources within the healthcare system, but also within the ecosystem. The lack of system integration, some of the outdated practice workflows, for example. I mean, that's a real challenge, really, where to get the change management buy-in from the clinicians, but also from the executive. So this is by no means saying that all the negatives, but these are the key areas to actually look at in order to solve the problems of implementation. So this chart here is from Deloitte in terms of looking at, I guess, some of the challenges. Cost of AI solution, integration, as I mentioned, implementation, looking at data and risk. Data is and for the researchers on the call will know how difficult that is, potentially, sharing data, getting access to other database from a governance perspective. Risk in a way, from the institution perspective, also the researchers, risk in a way could be managed, but I think data governance is a real challenge there. And they just split that in terms of the operational, organizational, and technology. So when you look at some of these challenges here from a technology perspective, some of that can be solved, quite easily, or easier than some of the other organizational and operational, because it comes back to the I guess the culture, the risk appetite of the institution, but also within the legal system as well. This is just to share, in terms of the, it's actually not a case study, but it's Sam Freeman, who's a PhD student looking at patients and healthcare professional perceptions on the use of AI in healthcare. So he interviewed 75, and he's just done the analysis recently, as in probably a couple of weeks ago, looking at the pillars of implementation, usability, efficacy, and monitoring, as well as evaluation. You can roll things out, but people will not use it, or the patient might say, "Oh, what's AI? I'm not going to, sort of be too keen on that." And the preliminary finding is showing that there's support for really looking at process in place and effective change management plans. Sounds like, very like common sense, right? But in a way, how do you actually develop that really effective change management plan in order to implement that? In terms of time, I might just skip through this very quickly. So implementation, looking at, I guess, the monitoring, the evaluation framework upfront. That's important because you want to be able to measure how you actually deploy the solution in the first place, and actually collecting data to measure that. Because remember, not only it's the acceptance from users, but also, investment or investors, like I use that term loosely, could be from a venture capital point of view in terms of investment, but also could be from the institution, could be from government, where they want to see that, maximizing that return on their investment. Usability, looking at how it's actually been used, or how easy it is for the user, both from the patients, but also the clinician perspective. And as well as clinical trials. Sorry, I just went too quick there. From a clinical trials perspective, the fact that there's that governance in place where software being treated as a medical device, and there needs to be that similar approval process in other for the tools to be widely accepted. And then we spoke about monitoring and evaluation. So this is the framework that I put together, looking at, so in a way, the effectiveness, as I mentioned before here, it's really driving change in terms of the economics of whatever the solution you deploy, as well as really sort of the experience of the patients and the doctors, the physicians using the AI's tool or solution, and importantly, the equitable access. So I used to think equitable access, but it's actually probably a bit more accurate to say it's actually equitable outcome. You can have the access, but you might not sort of getting the right outcome. And overlaying that is the PESTEL analysis, which is, political, economic, social, technological, ethical, and legal aspects of the solution. Lots to consider, right? Definitely, we tend to think of the ethical aspects, because the technology side of thing, there's solutions there, but the legal framework is always behind, as well as the adoptions, the social aspects. Definitely political. It's great to see the new government talking about, putting support or funding into, I guess, technology. The 1.2 million tech jobs by 2030, I think. But I do worry that everything goes somewhere else, and always talk publicly as well, where that part of that 1.2 million tech jobs should be going to healthcare as well, because if we're talking about big data, AI, we do need that expertise in data science and computing and data engineering. And just on that too, really interesting, the fact that some of the big banks, there was one bank, I can't remember who it was, but they had something like 3,000 software engineer. And when you think about it, like, we need some of that coming across into to healthcare, right? Anyway, that's just another way of looking at this. So efficiency. So when you look at a smart hospital ecosystem, where how AI is being deployed, and this slide is taken from Siemens Health Genie, I think that's what they call themselves, where it's that connectivity between GP clinics, community health centers, right through to, I guess, tertiary center or smart hospital hubs here. And in between, you've got integrated hospitals, specialists, networks that actually, or specialist networks, that linking and the flow there. It makes sense, but it's actually the, who's going to pay for it, how all the deployment. But, it's, when you look at it, the AI-driven automated workflow engine is actually linked some of that. So, you look at the e-health, you look at the supporting of diagnostic and therapeutic decision-making, for example, AI optimized operations of management, how you run it, the system adequately, rather than, sort of stop by with lots of potholes or what I call bottlenecks. So some of these examples here, in terms of the AI application, from small molecule drug discovery and development. So typically the whole pipeline, we talk about billions of dollars and 7 to 10 years, how AI, and we've already seen pockets of this technology being deployed, predictions of target relating to disease, profile of compounds and predictions of bioactivities, and right through to some of the drugs interactions, some of the tox simulations, and right through to, it's almost like bench to bedside, trial recruiting, design optimizations, and all of that sort of been deployed or actually been sort of weaving with some of the AI solution. So potentially what we see is, so instead of billions, still billion, but probably a bit more effective and be a shorter time frame as well. In medical imaging, and this is where we see radiology really at the forefront in terms of some of the AI applications here. So deep learning and medical image recognition, and the word deep is actually referred to the multi-layers of machine learning. So convolutional neural networks, that's how images is actually layers of image, and I'm really simplifying this, and I'm sure there's experts in the room, could do a better job than me. But essentially, you've got feature maps and images, and then you do the layers, and then the connected layers, and you do all the matching and so on and so forth. And bottom line is that the automation helps. And I say this, at some of the recent interviews I've done, where talk about the solution, AI solution, where in particular, let's say in the radiology setting, AI is being used really as a safety net, as a partner for the doctors to actually help, with their reports, for example. So in a way, or a spell checker, for example. So it's there to help, the clinicians to, I guess, in terms of reducing workload, but manage and run it through a bit more efficiently. In cancer care, screening, early diagnosis, staging, cancer therapy, novel therapeutics, lots and lots of application. So I've just finished a book chapter on the use of AI in brain tumor management. So I'm a co-authors with a couple of experts, and what we found is that it's actually all of this here, the screening, the use of I guess some of the really cool technology from other fields that actually bring that in. We won't have time to go through that, but the other one is the cancer patient digital twins, and this is a really interesting concept, where basically individual, and this is in relations to precision medicines, where individual have their data set combined, compare with population studies, and all of the data fit in and have that specific digital twins, if you will, of yourself. And what it means is that you're able to, I guess, personalize the diagnosis is one thing, but also the treatment. Certainly in cancer patient, that's critical, because it's no longer sort of, oh, we've got a new drugs, let's try. Oh, by the way, is this their first line, second line? Is this something that, how's that interacting with previously? So I think all of that data fit into here. If there's data from the previous treatment, it fit into here, where it's actually, build that digital twin of the patient, where it provide that, I guess, that predictions of, with this new treatment, what's the likelihood that, the patient will be responding to the new drugs, for example. And the other one is full disclosure, which I did mention. So I'm advising this company called OncoShot, where they look at, I guess, recruiting trial participants in the sort of oncology setting. Beyond sort of that, looking at the feasibility, looking at data, it's about linking, in terms of data available, my cursor, where you're looking at, say, the genomics data and actually linking that and doing the predictions as well. Matching is one thing, but it's also the prediction. So we sign up the collaboration agreement with Omnicol, which is a big group in New South Wales in the cancer genomic medicines, where linking the genomics data and doing that prediction. Matching is one thing, but it's like also that prediction as well. And in a way, it's a bridge between the farmers and the hospitals, providing that real-time data insights, that clinical trial matching, and really, again, building that bridge between the two parties. I'll go through quickly on some of this application, patient monitoring, remote patient monitoring. We hear a lot of that, the wearables and all of that. And even some of the really interesting work in terms of embedded sensors in implants, for example, that constantly collecting information. In the home setting, the smart home and the applications definitely there in our aged care facility setting as well, not just in the home, but in the aged care setting facility. The other one is really interesting as well on the translational safety medicine, and this is looking at, I guess, the safety aspects, the pharmacological toxicity of drugs and so on and so forth. That's a reference there. And Stefan, who I met recently, just really fascinating, the fact that you can really shorten the timeline, but also, making sure that the tool has been used to really reducing the risk, right? And that's what it's all about. And I think I just had an extra slide. I didn't move it properly. So economics, the other E's, as I mentioned. So this is where here, and the data is 2010 here. I think I've got an updated version a bit later on. But essentially, this is where more spending does not translate to better health outcome. In this case, typically the life expectancy versus healthcare expenditure. And what we see there is, spend more, but does not mean that, whereas Australia is sort of kind of in the middle, places like Japan, Israel, on the other hand, is really an interesting one, known as a sort of innovation nation. But their healthcare spending nowhere near, some of these OECD country, but yet, their health outcome and I guess they're big players in artificial intelligence in a broad sort of sense as well, not just in healthcare, but of course healthcare is an area. But a side note, McDonald's is actually investing, I think 2 years ago, paid $300 million for this AI company. Of course, McDonald's is not going to be in healthcare, but the AI technology in terms of doing a lot of prediction, a lot of behavioral and that sort of thing. So they do have a lot of, I guess, early stage companies, startups in this space too. So this is looking at a bit more contemporary with the data up to 2018. So, we're certainly in terms of, this is, just get my mouse here. So Australia is here, and as you can see, we increase our expenditure. And look, it's a crude sort of comparison, but typically that's what people have been used, looking at life expectancy and the healthcare expenditure as a measurement. Another way of looking at this as well, and certainly what we see is that where the actual, oh, that's right, this is based on UN data, but it's actually been what they call is the power parity, purchase power parity. So essentially it's kind of been normalized. And then this is similar data. So I won't go through that. I'll go to the next E, which is the experience. And Eric Topol wrote two really great books, in my view, talking about the future of medicines and AI. So the patient we see here now was one of his first one, and then Deep Medicine is the other one, talking about really the experience, the AI, the technology, and how that's actually influenced, healthcare delivery, but also healthcare management. The other one is, I don't know if any of you have heard of this one. I had the pleasure of meeting the author. So Fred Lee used to be the senior vice president of Disneyland, and this book is If Disney Ran Your Hospital. So talking about experience of course, can't sort of compare patients and people who go to Disneyland, right? But there's some parallels there where, as a consumer, as a client, what other things, and often it comes back to the technology is one thing, which is the AI, technology that we've been talking about, but it's actually the culture of the organization, the change management, the implementation. It's not a big book, quite easy to read. If you have spare time, really encourage you to have a read that as well. By no means I'm sort of advertising and supporting Disneyland in any way. And then the last one is this is the equitable outcome, where you're talking about, where some of the challenges here, AI can actually creating further bias, for example. The data set that you provide, you bring into your model, if it doesn't actually have that representations, the broader representation, for example. So it could be really creating further bias in the design, in the deployment. That discriminatory data is definitely there, in terms of how, for example, with the our breast screen study, if you deploy that set, model, say in places like Asia, we all know, we know that it's well documented that, for example, breast cancer incident in Asian women are different because of the different sort of in the breast density, in genetics, and everything else. So you've got to be really making sure that you don't create further bias, for example. This unequal access and resource allocation, it's always there, but it's how we're actually minimizing that, in terms of the ability to flip it around and say, well, technology hopefully will be able to create that equitable access, and therefore driving that better sort of equity outcome for patient. And then let's drill down a bit further from the global level, and in terms of sharing data between jurisdictions, but also that global health inequality as well. And right through to the societal level, institutional, clinical, and individual level as well. So this is one example, talking about COVID here and what it means for the participant. Let me just move on to the next one. I'm nearly done. This is a summary slide. So the 4 E's I just cover: the equity of access or equity outcome, the economics of, think about the cost saving that we've been talking about, the return on investments, the experience of the user, both from the doctors, the clinicians, and the patient perspective. And of course, that needs to come from being a bit more effective, I guess. And in terms of the value-based healthcare, it's about the defining the value that is important for the patient, And sometimes it's just, and this whole thing bring it back to patient-centered care that we all know, but it's how making it more meaningful. For example, if the solution deploy means that someone from the country Victoria, they don't have to drive to the INE or St Vincent, 2 hour drive and another 40 minutes finding car park and find the clinic and so on and so forth. All of that comes in play. And I think from the patient, the clinician, but also from the system perspective. And that's the end of my talk. And looking forward to the discussion and question.
Thank you, Tam. You actually already have a question coming from Ying. I'll read it out, but it will be in the chat box. We've got it there. So it said, great insight and great talk. One quick question. In your best knowledge, what is the most successful AI product in the field of medicine that has been launched in Australia?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. We're doing great work in the research, the translation, on the commercialization. Probably hard to pinpoint one, but in terms of, I guess, in terms of capital raising, I would say Harrison AI is the most successful one. So they started out actually in IVF and was working with Virtus Health, and then they pivoted into radiology. And so I know the founders reasonably well. So their Series A fundraise, I think at the time was $29 million. And then their Series B was 129 million, I think. The latest one is actually they pivot into pathology as well, which I didn't really cover in some of the use case. So in terms of the raise, that's, Harrison AI, probably one of the successful one. Application LBT Innovation, based in South Australia, is another one where it's in pathology, it's in image analysis of agar plates, used in pathology, doing cell counting and all of that. So that's another one that I think they, in terms of deployment, not only in Australia, but globally as well. And, with my investor hat on, I know there's a fair few AI companies or startup, scale-up companies really out there, raising, and it's an exciting area where I think there will be opportunity. The fact that other funds, I'm not sure people on the line are aware, but some of the other funds like Blackbird, Airtrees, the typical, I guess, fintech, SaaS, software as a service, that is, companies are now actually investing in health tech and medtech and focusing, or with an interest, a keen interest in medtech and in particular AI in medicine. So yeah, I mean it's hard to pinpoint one, but as I said, Harrison AI is probably one that raised a lot, and certainly the pathology one is actually with Sonic Healthcare, and then there might be something that I could potentially miss as well. So if anyone in the audience can drop in, the chat, more than happy to. Well, I agree. I mean, and this is the other thing. So revenue is important. You can raise, but it's revenue. It's how much you actually, you can raise as much as you can. You can value as a unicorn, but it's the ARR. It's your annual recurring revenue or the returns. I think that's important. Thank you for that.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I suppose, from, I suppose, your experience as well with clinical trials and AI, do you think there's greater pushback in the commercialization of AI into health than potentially drugs? Or do you think if they follow strict protocols and prove their value in their research, they are similar in the getting across that hurdle from research to commercialization?
So it's definitely different from drugs. The regulatory pathway, which we don't have time to go through, but software as a medical device, it's the pathway itself. It's come back to that clinical validation, the ability to actually getting. And if I was to go back to the global market, which is a really interesting one, because it's driving some of that, because you need capital to actually deploy, do things, and so on and so forth. But when you look at the actual investment, and so this is the quantum itself. So the total here is, by 2028, it's going to be about $58 billion. And of course, North America is always a big one, but Asia Pac is not far behind. Drug discovery in medicine, as you can see here, repurposing, clinical research, trials, personalized medicine, other application. It's in a way, it's been used in terms of the commercialization. It comes back to that. You can create value, but it's actually what it means, what it translates into other fields. And importantly, in my sort of opinion, in terms of all the fundraise, all of the startups, in the VC world, you can raise, but it's actually, can you develop? Because you don't want, and you hear, every now and then you hear company X, raise 50 million last year and now having to, sort of wind back and sack people and close down and haven't actually deliver, So whereas I think AI, there's that real opportunity to say creating value, but also potentially it's almost like you can fail fast, essentially. Unlike drugs, it's probably in terms of the drugs trials, you get to your phase 2, if you're able to demonstrate, sort of good outcome, then great, you pass that valley of death, right? In I guess in software, in AI, there's always the ability to actually pivot as well, in my view. So it might not work in this instance, but in my opinion, it doesn't actually require a lot of capital, because the pathway, the regulatory pathway bring about in clinical validation is actually somewhat slightly easier. IBM Watson, yeah, this is a really interesting one. Well, IBM Watson's, for what it's worth, and this is a good question for Stefan Harrier. So I'm not deflecting the question. I was just sharing with you. So Stefan he's the Chief Innovation Officer for the Digital Health CRC, ex-IBM, and last time he was on a panel with me. I think he's up to 70th patent. So he's like his patent. He's amazing with his work through IBM. The thing with some of these solutions is that it can be quite costly, like quite expensive. Like I just don't think our average research institution like us would be able to afford some of the solution. That's my view. And so it needs to, and this is the whole thing about technology, the solution, you've got to be able to make sure that it's widely available as well, because otherwise it's just like, well, what's the point of having a solutions out there, some sort of AI tool that you need a lot of resource from financial, but also from the people people to actually make a good use out of that. Can we leverage? Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one is I think Google Health opened their research division in Sydney recently. Oh, Ming, yes, please, you can answer this as well, but let me just close up on that. And in terms of the investment side, the other thing is Amazon invested heavily as well. They bought One Medical, although apparently they're sort of shut down. And then the like of tech company like TikTok, bought, I think, a change of hospitals in China for like $1.4 billion. Ming, please take this one too.
Ming? Oh, he's coming over to us.
Okay.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for your time. Actually, we are all in other rooms. So,
Okay.
yeah, yes. There's so many successful story. I know Harrison AI, and then I understand they have the story they bring this AI into pathology. What with I forgot the service provider's name, because for any AI company, the challenge is how can you legitimately utilize the clinical data when you got the data from. So that's a very challenging. But the way
Yes.
that they work with this service for the radiology provider, it's really allowed them to legally utilize the clinical data. I think that's quite important for AI companies as well.
Yeah, I think it was RMIT, and interestingly, RMIT was acquired by EQT, which is a big private equity firm, a global one. But yeah, it's quite fascinating, in terms of the. But my view is that, and I'm sure they've got a lot of plans, and underneath their AI hood, that comes back to the deployment, and from the investor perspective, the example you gave, it's. You want revenue from the company as well. The raise is one thing, but you want to see revenue because that's where you get your returns from, right? Ming, did you want to answer Mark's questions? The first one is on IBM Watson.
Oh, I'm not aware IBM Watson is working on this type of things. Yeah.
Okay. So that's fine because it has flag as you would like to answer. And then Mark, the last one is model outside of VC raise options. Well, there's always the non-dilutive side of thing, and Ming's been very successful with the MRFF joint ventures. There's always that option as well. But I think it comes back to I guess that collaboration at a national level, but also globally as well. And I think, Ming, if you'd like to chime in for this one as well, where you wear many hats, and with sort of global collaboration partners, I think that's where that's important, because the deployment, the technology development is one thing. The deployment is, you can run it here in Australia. If you can deploy solutions elsewhere, let's say in China or other part of the world, that's the key, because it's like, and mind you, people might say, well, in some jurisdictions, like in the US, all you need to do is just, have your solutions, get the buy-in from the like of, say, in Texas Medical Center. But I guess my view on that is, getting the return on investment is one thing, but it's actually about creating impact, because, there's 8 billion people on this earth, and there's always room for creating impact somewhere else as well. Ming, your thought on this one?
Yes, I assume what Mark want to understand is in the perspective, like a startup, as a startup company, what is other models outside of VC raise? So if this is a question, I think the VC raise probably is the best model, because for any grant application, just like the Medical Research Future Fund or this grant application or industry grant, there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, it would take 3 months writing up the grant, and then wait for 1 year to have to know the outcome. That's completely waste time. And then, but then if you really have a good technology and everything's legally sound and the company is like a reasonably good structure, then a VC raise is it will take just 3 months due diligence. Then you got the money. So, so I think a VC raise is probably the best option for a startup company. But then for academics, different. For academic, like we are running this research project, our solutions, we wanted to, from data, we develop idea, and then from data to idea, and from ideas to patent, and licensable like patent. And then we develop prototype, and then we license technology to whoever wanted. That's another pathway. I mean, or in the perspective like academic, how academic would create solutions using AI as a tool.
Yeah, and I think the MRFF one is they probably had a few hundred applications. There's only 6 got up, right?
5.
5. That's right. You have 1. We have 1, and I think there's 2 or 3 in New South Wales. And so it's like all of that. But I think it's certainly getting better. And Mark, as you know, in Victoria we've got that the Breakthrough Victoria Fund as well, and healthcare, health and life sciences is one of the pillars. So that's a $2 billion fund. Supporting, I guess, the early stage work in Victoria. But I think, there's always, and I'm sure we're all aware, the recent, I was at the Invest Victoria dinner last night, and talking about in terms of the investment coming to the state, and I'm sure we all remember the headline of that $250 million invested to the Beta Doherty Institute by Jeff Cummings. Quite frankly, I don't know if anyone online know this person. I have to look up, but he's an interesting person. I mean, it's not new. He's already invested like $100 million to the University of Calgary in Canada at the medical school. And so who knows, maybe we should sort of look at develop Victoria and Melbourne as the AI hub, and collaborate with the Live Sheba Medical Center in Israel. And I know some tech company might invest a couple $100 million for us to work on AI solutions in healthcare, right? Why not? So anyway, always good to dream big.
Well, thank you so much, Tam, for the seminar tonight. We've gone over 6 o'clock now, so I think we'll wrap up with the questions. But I think we had a really good discussion there. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everyone that tuned in for tonight.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ming. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.